Morning, everybody. That's a prop for later. I got into my hotel room last night and I was catching just the end of the news hour, and then after that was Ken Burns' documentary on the Mayo Clinic, and I thought, that's weird. I'm in Rochester, Minnesota, and there's a documentary on the Mayo Clinic. That's really strange. And then I thought, well, they probably just loop that at the local PBS affiliate all the time. But I did watch it. I knew about the Mayo Clinic. I've been a speaker here at Transform before. A friend in college, her father was a governor of the clinic, and I got a tour many years ago. I knew a little bit about it, but I did watch that presentation. I did watch the documentary last night, and I didn't realize the extent to which the Mayo Clinic had really revolutionized the business model around medical care, particularly with medical records, the team approach to the patient, the sort of putting the patient as the center, the hub of the wheel, the sort of ability to sort of put everyone on salary and not pay for per procedure, that this was sort of these revolutionary sort of efforts at sort of changing the medical care business model. I thought, God, this is perfect, because I need a lot of help to to work on a new project, which is to create a population health business model. And that's the focus of my talk here today. In order to get to a population health business model, that's what's the title of this talk. There are a few building block ideas that I need to develop before we get to that conversation, and one of them is one I have not shared in public before. I have not talked about this before, and it's very personal, and I hesitate to share it, but it really is something that I keep on coming back to, which is that when I was very young, my parents got divorced, first on either side of their families to ever get divorced, with a lot of shame and emotional pain and financial pain to the family. And I remember my mom sitting us down. It was a Sunday afternoon. She sat us down in her bedroom, and she said, "Your dad's not coming back." And here I am, like this little kid, and I am scared. I do not know what's going on. And I remember just rubbing my hand back and forth on this gold and black ugly bedspread. Oh my goodness. And thinking, this is a catastrophe, and I'm scared. And I remember, and then the next day, this showed up on our street corner, and I think it's funny because I walked up those steps, and a friendly bus driver who knew me, accepted me into the bus, and I got on that bus, and it took me to school, a school where teachers cared about me, and it was immediately I was plugged back into some structure, right? And it wasn't just a school, actually. I spent a lot of time at our neighborhood library, and the librarians knew me by name, and I would suggest books, and they knew what I liked and all the rest, and I had great I had Cub Scout leaders and Little League coaches and Sunday school teachers, and I just think of all these people who kind of created all of this sort of structure in a time when my family was really going through a lot of chaos. And I lived in a community that we were in a low-income area, but it was a middle-class community, and we had, my mom was able to get a job, and the crime rate wasn't too high. And when I think back about what it was about that time that was so fortunate, and what was able to sort of allow me to sort of weather this storm, was that there were these guardrails in my community. There were these guardrails that kept, even though things were going bad at home, I wasn't going to go off the cliff because of all of these sort of safety features that were built into my community. And it's very similar to a concept that Bob Putnam at Harvard comes up with in his book, Our Kids, where he talks about airbags. And he thinks about what is it about sort of middle income, higher income kids that when they experience some kind of a shock, where the inevitable shocks that all of us experience, whether it's depression or drug addiction or what have you, that these airbags deploy for kids with resources, and they're able to sort of weather that shock more effectively and move on with their lives. Low-income kids don't often have those airbags. And so I keep on thinking about guardrails and airbags as sort of my mantra these days. And I think every kid deserves guardrails and airbags. That's something that is key and fundamental to a population health business model. A second concept, building block concept for a population health business model, is this idea about community development. Many of you probably are not familiar with community development, but I'll tell you one thing it is not are these failed urban renewal programs of the past, public housing, Section 8, the projects, these kinds of things. Community development is not that. It is a network of players that include community development corporations. The first community development corporation was the Bedford-Stuyvesant Corporation. Bobby Kennedy championed in the mid-1960s in New York City. There are now 4,000 CDCs, and it's hard to say CDCs in a health environment, but when we say CDC, we mean Community Development Corporation, not someplace in Atlanta. But there are 4,000 of these now across the country. There are community development financial institutions. These are nonprofit banks. There are about 1,100 of these around the country now, in all parts of the country. They're for-profit, not-profit, affordable housing, and real estate developers that are part of this system as well. There's lots of government subsidy that goes into this. There's a low-income housing tax credit. That's about $14 billion a year. There's a new markets tax credit that funds primarily small business development. That's about $7 billion last year. There's a community development block grant, the Hope Investment Partnership block grant, the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, lots of government subsidy programs that fund this network. There are foundations that support this network. State and local government also support it. But the big driver, and this might be a surprise to you, are banks. The biggest chunk of money that supports this system comes from the banking system, and they are motivated by the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 to invest into low-income communities where they take deposits. And the total is about $150 billion a year that's being invested into low-income communities. It's a big amount. And it builds things that are not like the Pruitt-Igoe, which is what I just showed you a photo of. This is a project called Solara in San Diego. It's solar because it's solar powered. None of the low-income tenants here have a utility bill. But it's also beautiful, and I wanted to show you, there are 3 million homes like this, 3 million apartments like this, housing about 10 million low-income people. And they're lovely. There were places that you'd be proud to have your mother live in. It's a flexible program, so the subsidies that are used for this program can be used to build large family apartments with 3-4 bedrooms. It can also be used, in this case, for single-room occupancy for people who are formerly homeless. This is a development in San Francisco that's really focusing on getting people who are formerly homeless off the streets. It's got medical care offices in there, case managed offices for navigators and coaches to help people get their lives back on track. Community Development invests in kids. They do a lot of construction of facilities for charter schools. This is a Knowledge is Power program school in Southeast Washington, D.C., a low-income African-American community. And what I love about this picture, and we just had a graphic artist in our staff just redo my slides, and he said they were busy, and I'm mad at him because he shrunk all my pictures down. They used to be mostly pictures, but you can still kind of see it there where, you know, this is a beautiful building is the point. And what I'm trying to say, you know, really make it very clear that when you're a young kid and you walk into that building, there are 2 messages that are sent to you. One is that this is a society that cares about you, and 2, this is a society that expects a lot from you. Community Development invests in high-quality daycare for kids. And it's also engaged in resident-focused economic development. This is the Baker Ripley Center in Houston. It's in an area there's a lot of immigration in Houston that you may not realize. It's one of the most diverse immigrant communities of any city in the country. And this area was formerly so dangerous that there was a federally qualified health center here that had 24-hour armed guard. There is no security on this property any longer. It was redeveloped by the Baker Ripley community-based organization in partnership with the community, and it reflects what that community really wanted. One of the things they were very frustrated with was that they were going to payday lenders and check cashers and paying way too much for those financial services. So they asked to have a bank branch be located there. There's a credit union here. They asked for a tax prep office to be there to help them with their EITC applications when the tax time came. There's a legal aid office. So many, as I've mentioned, many of these families in this community are immigrants and are working out some of their immigration status. So you have these examples where working with the community, tapping into those larger funding, that $150 billion, you create a kind of a local solution that is absolutely one that the community is invested in, and there's no security here. They've never needed security again. This is the last of my slides on just to show you what examples of what community development builds. This is the Market Creek Plaza. It's a commercial development in San Diego. It's got a grocery store in what was formerly a food desert. This community really insisted on having some communal space where they could come meet. So it's got it has an amphitheater. And what I really love about this too is most of the people in this area are from southern Mexico. They have a real pride of their Mayan heritage. And you'll see the sort of the motif here is it was designed to look like the Palenque temples in the Yucatan Peninsula, the sort of ancient Mayan temples there. These are some of the examples of what community development does in these kind of boutique sort of community, solving community sort of problems at the local level, but it does it at a huge scale, right? And this third building block I wanted to mention was the way this is done. So it's not just what was built, it's how it was built. Community development is a quasi-market. It is a series of incentives that incentivize both the public sector and the private sector to work together with communities to try to find problems and create amenities that will enhance those communities. So it is good, but it's not big enough, and we experienced something that was very similar to what you might find in Baltimore, where these maps that sort of, the areas that we care about in community development, where they may have overcrowding in housing, it may be, there may be high unemployment or high poverty rates, are also the areas where they have a high incidence of prevalence of childhood obesity or chronic disease or violence, the areas that the health people care about. And so about 10 years ago, we started a partnership with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Federal Reserve banks around the country to hold meetings to bring those two groups together. So we've had 40 of those meetings now over the last 10 years. The last one was at our branch in Helena, Montana. And they're fantastic, like they're super exciting because these are people who, they just get each other. You know, it's like long lost siblings kind of coming together. The problem is that in the early years, it was very exciting because intellectually we all got it. We didn't know what to do about it. You know, like we get it that we should be working together, but what does that mean on the ground? And I'll just tell you, we are now making a huge leap forward where billions of dollars are now being co-invested by the health sector and the community development sector together to focus on the upstream social determinants of health. And I'm going to skip through a few of these. Dignity Health has a $30 million loan fund that they invest in partnership with those nonprofit banks, those community development financial institutions. Trinity Health has something very similar. The Healthy Futures Fund is an example, $300 million fund run by Morgan Stanley with the help of the Local Initiative Support Corporation, one of these nonprofit banks. But they have a participation also from the Kresge Foundation to drive the cost of capital down to make these projects pencil out. And one of the requirements to get access to this is to really adhere to the John Castle sort of theory about the clinic adopts the whole neighborhood as the patient. In this case, this is an FQHC. It has job training for local residents to get into the medical field. The white buildings on top are housing, 200 units, 100 for, half of them go to families, another half to people who are formerly homeless. This is near a transit stop. This is a clinic that has adopted the whole neighborhood as the patient, and those incentives are beginning to drive that kind of behavior. This is an example in Northwest Ohio, where ProMedica is partnering with that same nonprofit bank to create a $45 million fund to make strategic investments as an anchor institution to improve the communities where ProMedica's campuses are. But what was exciting about this is that this is one of the first examples where a hospital system and one of these nonprofit banks are creating a formal fund in order to make those kinds of investments. The head of LISC, Maurice Jones, they invest about $1 billion a year into low-income communities. He thinks he's going to double that amount in the next 5 years, primarily bringing in dollars from hospitals. This is the Healthy Neighborhood Equity Fund in Boston. It's a $22 million fund. It was really inspired by Maggie Superchurch is the one who runs it, and she was inspired by this very simple question. Why can I invest in a company that makes a pill that lowers blood pressure, but I can't invest in a neighborhood that does exactly the same thing? So she's created this fund to try to sort of invest quickly, particularly in areas that are experiencing gentrification and displacement from the expanding rail line in Boston. So these are all great examples. We're still not getting at the scale that we need to make sure that every kid in this country has guardrails and airbags. And so what I am sort of proposing is this idea of a market that values health, or the population health business model. For those of you, I've just started playing with this presentation, this idea. I'm working on this this is early days. But a lot of times I get the first question is, the market created income inequality and these bad outcomes in the first place. Why would you use it to solve a social problem or work on social determinants of health? And I want to be really clear that this is, what we're talking about here is a quasi-market that was really, we can use the tool of the market in order to create the incentives that we want. And in this case, it's guardrails, more guardrails and more airbags. So in that marketplace, and as in any market, there are buyers and sellers, buyers and producers. The buyers in this case are, there's the twin revolutions as I see them are the fact that we have, if you think about the medical care system, $3.5 trillion spent on medical care, 85% of that is spent on chronic disease. Most chronic disease is avoidable. Most chronic disease that's avoidable is generated in low-income neighborhoods. So to me, it seems like there's about $1 trillion that could be repurposed to go upstream to focus on guardrails and airbags. Similarly, we spend about $1 trillion a year on the downstream effects of poverty. So the program that I hate, and did I mention that these views are my own and not representing the Federal Reserve System, but I should be clear about that. And please don't tweet that I hate job training, but I think job training is stupid. Here's this effort. We spend tens of billions of dollars to train people who weren't educated properly in the first place. It doesn't work. What we should be doing is making sure they have guardrails and airbags so they graduate from high school with the skills that they need to learn a job whenever they lose one. So there's that $2 trillion, that's the twin revolution that I see, but there are lots of other buyers. Medicare, Medicaid, Veterans Administration, health insurers. United Health is a buyer of health. The work that they do with Chicanos por la Causa in Arizona to house their Medicaid patients with affordable housing is a great example of a buyer of health. Foundations, the Robert Johnson Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, Conversion Foundations, California Endowment, Colorado Health Foundation, also organizations that are willing to pay for a better health outcome. Lots of money in the buyer category. Well, who's a producer? Well, the people who make guardrails and airbags are producers of health. All those people I mentioned, the teachers and the coaches and the scout leaders, those are people who are producing health. And I think it's a helpful way to think about this over the life course. Being born at term to a family that's ready to accept a child is a great indicator of future health. Therefore, nurse-family partnership is a producer of health. Engaging a child's brain as it's developing in the early years and making sure that child is ready to learn at kindergarten is a predictor of future health. Therefore, preschool teachers are producers of health. Reading at grade level is the best predictor of future health. Therefore, tutors are producers of health. Having an adult outside of your family who cares about you, the research shows, dramatically increases your life chances and improves your later health. Therefore, big brothers, big sisters are producers of health. I mean, you get where I'm going with this, right? I mean, there are lots of people who can produce the guardrails and the airbags that we could be paying more effectively with those trillions of dollars that we're spending ineffectively at the moment. Now, how do you connect these together? How do you get this market to come together? And I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to go through this very quickly. But basically, you have population health islands in a fee-for-service sea. A literal example of this is Maui, where Kaiser now owns all the hospitals, and they have 50% of the residents are policyholders. They own the downstream medical care cost risk for that island. And when they realized they had that, they started talking to preschools. So you see that, and I think there are little Mauis all over the country where whether or not it's a company town or a rural county that has one health insurer, there's some of these closed loops like little Mauis everywhere where you can probably start working on a population health sort of payment structure. Those funds that I mentioned, the Healthy Futures Fund, the Healthy Neighborhood Equity Fund, those are vehicles that connect buyers and sellers. That's how hospitals and banks co-invest in these upstream social determinants of health. And I get that there are, people ask me this often, that there's this idea that somehow you're going to stop, you can't stop giving dialysis to the type 2 diabetic and just start paying preschool teachers. I get that you can't do that. There are mechanisms, though, to make this transition. One, and it's pay for success financing is really the focus of that. These ideas are summarized in the book that I have here on stage, but one of them is the social impact bond. Another is prize-based philanthropy. These are all, the case studies of this are all written up in the book. Advanced market commitments, social impact guarantees, investment tax credits, and again, like I said, the population health business models, those islands in the feudal sea. I went through that very quickly. This is a complicated idea. This book is available to you for free. This is your tax dollars at work. But we'd be happy to send you copies that really summarize these ideas. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk to you.